Thank you for joining us today for another Knowledge is Power Foundation Power Session. Today's session is proudly brought to us by Rise Academy. Um, Please visit riseacademy.ca for more information. We're very grateful for them sponsoring today's power session. Today's session is with a friend of mine, a relatively new friend. I met him a few months ago now, Brock Serro. Brock, welcome.
Thank you, Daryl.
I hope I pronounced the last name right.
You did.
Okay, perfect. Like I said, I met Brock not too long ago, a few months ago, and quickly realized that he's one of the most interesting people I've met, one of the most inspiring people I've met, and humble, nice guy. And I thought I needed to get Brock on for a power session, and he graciously accepted the request. And I just want Brock to introduce you to the KIP viewers. And without any further delay, I will turn over the floor to you, and please share with our followers your incredible story.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Daryl. I certainly appreciate that. Hopefully it's as incredible as it's made out to be, and I certainly appreciate the accolades. I come to you humbled and honored for the opportunity to speak, certainly. As a brief introduction, and probably in order of priority here, I'm a father, I'm a husband, son, and brother, but I do come to you as a veteran, and where we met as a barista. In the immortal words of Lewis Carroll, I think I'll just begin at the beginning, and when I come to the end, I'll stop. I was born in Ottawa, middle class family. I'll just touch on the early years, because they're important factors in where I am now and how I've decided to live my life. Growing up, I lacked a bit of confidence. I didn't show up to everything. Certainly, I wasn't a great student, which is to suggest I hadn't actually discovered my love of learning, which is fully entrenched now. And I suggest I didn't have much clear ambition back then. There were a few ambitions, and I'll touch on those as I go, but they sort of manifested over time. So the high school years were interesting. It was the 80s, which was in and of itself an interesting period. But at the latter years of high school, I was, by virtue of my deep voice, I was told, and maybe looking a bit older than others, I don't know if that's true or not, but I was asked to act in a play. I was asked to take the lead in 42nd Street at the high school play. And I can't express enough what that did to my confidence levels. It sort of brought me out of my shell and introduced me to a side of myself that I've been drawing on ever since. And it's an important sort of emergence of who I am now. And it was actually, I had to sing on stage for the first time. And as I tell my story, you'll understand how important that has become to me. After high school, or rather after the high school play, I ended up doing a few plays in Ottawa. That's a semi-professional theater. And it really it was the opening of the veil, the true creative spirit that I believe I still have, or I am sort of emerged therein. But you can't, get into the acting stream without thinking about where does it go now. And it was a natural migration. There was a confluence of things that occurred and circumstances, but I ended up in Vancouver. And I landed in Vancouver in 1992. And that's an important year because that's when the grunge scene exploded. That's when the West Coast music came alive, And I landed right in the middle of that. Great music, sort of somewhat a social cultural revolution. It was the angst of the 90s, and I landed right in the heart and soul of it. Great coffee scene, which is another important byline to my story. But I landed there with this kind of vision of acting, and I didn't really have a plan. And I don't know how far I thought I might go. So I got into some lessons to do some commercial acting and whatnot. But very quickly I realized I was not perhaps as passionate about it as I thought I might be. Certainly I was distracted by music and some other things that were now exposed to me. But it was a rough start. I landed there with a suitcase and a guitar, and I didn't make any plans or any arrangements. So, there was a few nights wandering around and grabbing the odd hotel, but a few nights on the odd park bench as well. And it's an interesting thing to tell because it was when I first started to understand who I was as a person and what I could handle as a person. I realized I had a resiliency. I understood I could handle things and I could find a way through circumstance. I understood I developed a resourcefulness, and I was very easy for me to accept circumstances. And even to this day, especially, you start reading things like Viktor Frankl's, The Man's Search for Meaning, and you start understanding, you can't control circumstance, but you can control how you react to circumstance. And I didn't read that book back then, but I realize now that I understood that, at least at its root. And it stayed with me my whole life, and that's a theme you're going to hear as I speak here, which is I began to understand I can't control everything, but life is a series of choices, and those choices have consequences. And that whole period for me, coming out of school, heading out to Vancouver, and I'll talk about some other travel in a minute here. But it was a period of exploration, it was a period of discovery, and it's a period of true growth. And that growth theme for me is a core theme in how I live my life now. So suffice to say, I spent a couple of years in Vancouver. Again, I had sort of a sense of what I wanted to do. I deviated from that very quickly. Surrounded by the mountains. Wow, mountains are still my calling. The music, the coffee. But after 2 years out in Vancouver, it ended naturally enough. And how that ended was with an offer to travel. So I packed my, at that point, bags, and yet again, the guitar. And I moved my way back through Ottawa, touched base with the family. And I wasn't sure where I was going, but I bumped into a friend at the old neighborhood pub. And he was sidelined from a climbing injury from a trip he had planned. And, over a pint, we decided that we had to go to India. So, we made our plans loosely, booked our travel, and we're about to make our way to India when one of those, important choices came up again now. So if you know the history of India, and I'm not asking you to to divulge whether you do or don't, it's in 93, 94, there was actually the pneumonic plague of bubonic plague had exposed itself in India. And it was a real test of, understanding consequences. The choice we made at that point was going to have some consequences. And in the end, we decided to go, and we jumped on a plane and we flew off to India. In the end, the plague was not a factor for us. There were some other little bugs you get from those travels that I had to deal with afterwards. But what really came to pass was this love of travel, this love of the unknown, this concept of adventure, risk and the unknown. And that still holds true to me today. I find often I go places with no itinerary. And that's metaphorically true with my life as it is, true in its core essence. But I'll give you an example. One of the goals I had with my children was I wanted to travel with them before they, hit full maturity. So back, I think it was about 2016, I took my older daughter rather, and we flew to Iceland. And we went there with a plane ticket, and I'd rented a car. And that was it. Nothing was booked. And, that was a test for her, certainly, but it was also, taking that a risk. But I understand that's how I like to do things. That's just inherent with who I am now. In the end, we camped for 9 glorious days in Iceland and traveled. And she emerged as a sort of a resourceful and resilient spirit as well. And that could have gone sideways, but it was a beautiful experience. Another thing that came out of traveling through India was patience. There's many, many times I went to catch a train. These cities in India are huge, millions and millions of people. But you could wait 2, 4, 12, 24 hours for a train or to get moving on your destination. And again, it goes back to that concept of circumstance, right? I can't control that, but I can control how I react to it. I can accept it and relax, read a book, take a nap, or I can move on. And it's a brilliant way of thinking about life, I think, and it sort of represents how I live my life today. A couple milestones in India, which have lasting impacts on me as well too. I was exposed to Buddhist meditation. Spent my 21st birthday actually under one of the seedlings from the Bodhi tree Buddha was enlightened under, which is a phenomenal landmark in my life. Exposure to motorcycles, which we'll talk about as I carry on here. I don't certainly label myself as a minimalist, but that concept of carrying what you need has stayed with me my life. But what really resonated with me from that time, and has stayed with me as well, is you're in a place like New Delhi, it's abject poverty adjacent to excessive wealth. And it's the contrast is unavoidable. You cannot ignore it, and it's remarkable because you see people in sort of a true survival state. And what really resonated with me was the kindness and the happiness. You meet people that have nothing and are willing to give you everything, and that's true of the wealthy as well too. But it's just to get it from abject poverty is just it just shocks the soul. It's a beautiful thing. But what really struck me was that that abject poverty for them was not a barrier to happiness, right? They just smiled. They were just happy to give. Maybe there was pride in that, or whatnot, but it was just, you see that, and it really impacts your soul, and it's carried me through. I saw the same thing when I was serving in Bosnia, right? Post-war, or a war-torn environment, you couldn't go have a coffee without being offered sugar, and you knew the sugar was a rare commodity. It was a beautiful thing. So I'll sort of wrap up India there. I ended up coming home. This would have been about 95, I suspect. And I was sick. You pick up the bugs. I had some dysentery and some GERD to deal with, and it took me a little while to recover. That's an expression of the consequence of the choice to go, right? So ended up back in the kitchens that I had left, a little bit aimless again. Certainly, where do you go from there, right? You've just had your view of the life, your Western sensibilities shocked. And I had to take a moment to sort of reconcile that and figure out where I was going to go next. And that kind of takes me to the start of my veteran story. So, all of that up to about 22 years of age or whatnot, I refer to as chapter 1 of my life. And it's an easy thing for me to think of that in cycles, right? So, especially when I retired almost exactly the same period later, right? So, but I was having a beer with another coworker when I can't recall whether it was leaving the military or was entering the military, but that was the topic of conversation. And then I realized that I did have one ambition, referencing back to where we started. And that was from, some time when I was in the cadets, and I really wanted to be a paratrooper. I wanted my parachute wings. And I thought, you know what, this is an interesting path. And I couldn't see the trajectory of working in the kitchens. It was unclear to me how I would pursue that. So I joined the reserves. And it's important to also tell, I went back and finished the high school I had left, right? I had to go back and finish that. I was a couple of credits short. Got healthy again, got strong. So it was kind of the culmination of that exploration, discovery, and growth. And now I had made a decision, taking me a certain direction. And that was a big choice that lasted well over 20 years. So, when I reflect back on chapter 1, I talked about a lack of confidence and emergence and understanding creativity. But it was the latter years, and when I was traveling on my own and having to tap into my resourcefulness and my resiliency, where I developed confidence. I can highlight acting as the sort of the start point of that. But I started showing up for everything. I knew that the best way to be a part of anything or to advance is just to show up half the time. Started taking action and making those choices and understanding that there's consequence for them, positive and negative, right? So I think it's important that I address adversity, because for me, there wasn't a lot of adversity. I had a comfortable upbringing in a stable environment. And really, the only adversity in my life was tied to my choices. And at the end of the day, it was learning that I had to get out of my own way. And the military kind of opened that up for me. I now had a new start,
Okay.
and one I chose, right? And now I can professionalize on a clear path. But it's important to understand that that creative and expressive soul that emerged at the end of chapter 1, acting, music, drawing, not back then writing, but it's led to writing in my life now. It was sort of the bridge that brought me in, and that just continued to develop as we moved forward. So the start of chapter 2 was the military. So I had a 20+ year career. I achieved that parachute objective fairly quickly. And in the early parts of my career were spent jumping out of planes, which I loved. So that suggests appropriately that I joined the infantry, and I did a couple tours in Bosnia with the infantry. I've already made reference to Bosnia. I didn't stay in the infantry. I wanted to educate myself differently. I wanted to access the resources and the opportunities available to me in the military. So I took a couple of different paths within my tenure. And one of those, and a big one, was to take on the responsibility of being an officer. So I did. I went and I applied to become an officer, and I went through the process, and I took my commission. And it was a wonderful second half of my career. And it culminated in what I would suggest, for me anyway, were unexpected heights. It was a very rewarding path, and it was not necessarily over when I decided to leave. I developed that resiliency and that resourcefulness in a professional way now, not just that sort of personal exploration. One of the great assets I took out of that latter part of my career certainly was understanding responsibility, professional responsibility, but also starting to understand the relationship paradigm, with my peers, with my subordinates, with my superiors. And, it's a reciprocal thing. And until, for me anyway, until I understood that it was reciprocal, the way you treated people was going to reflect directly how they treated you. And there was a couple of times along that journey where I had to learn that the hard way, and it was a great path for growth.
Okay.
But at the end of the line, and if my kids were here, they'd be like, yeah, of course, Dad, we know. The bottom line is respect, and that's once you learn to respect, you can expect respect, right? So it is reciprocal. So what a valuable lesson. I did those, my wife suggests I should talk about my career a little more. I did do some time in Afghanistan, and that's important as well, because, the Bosnia years were peacekeeping, which was distinctly different than the war fighting we did in Afghanistan. Different, the distinction between, the peacekeeping of Bosnia and the war fighting in Afghanistan. You just have to look at it through a different lens. And it's important to understand that, because if you don't learn to adapt to the circumstances, apply your trade crafts and your biases and whatnot to the circumstances, then you can run into some problems. Peacekeeping is not war fighting, and there's moral and ethical imperatives that are attached to those different paths. So in the end, I loved my career. I loved the people I worked with. To the point where I'm still engaged with most of them. I meet them outdoors for some kayaking. I'll go for a beer. They definitely show up for the music that's in my life now. Identified I'm a barista. I see them all the time in the coffee shop. I think I would be, quite honestly, lost if I wasn't able to maintain those links back into my military family. And I'm very grateful that my transition allowed me to maintain those links. I have nothing negative to say about my experience. I have only positive to say about it. And my decision to leave was based on a different confluence of factors, one of which is the creative theme that exists within my life. I realized that there was a fork in my career, and I was going to either commit down this road, or I had to really hardly think, are my priorities my children and my family, or are my priorities my job? And that's a big distinction when your kids are entering high school and needing that stability, especially in the environment which is social media and the influence that can have on lives right now. But in the end, it was, that alone may not have been the right reason, but certainly having the passion allowed me to easily transition out of the military. I know when I did my departure party, I referenced a scene from The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, where, Captain Mike is talking to Benjamin Button, and he's like, I want to be an artist. You got to do what you're meant to do. And he tears his shirt open. He's like, I'm an artist, and he's a tattoo artist. And that's how I just felt. I felt, I was working in an office. I was doing good things. I was creative with my PowerPoint. But there was a scratch, an itch that wasn't being satisfied. And that passion lay elsewhere. And, I had the resources through the military to explore a different path. So, it's, I'll touch on it this way. Once I got exposed to what resources were available to us, I started showing up. I went to do some workshops. I understood that there was an education process for the creative side. I started getting interested in business. I applied for a boot camp through one of Prince Charles's charities that's linked to the military. It's called Prince's Operation Entrepreneur. I got accepted. I flew out to Memorial University. I did the boot camp, and in order to get there, I needed to bring a business plan with me. And this sort of brings me back to that idea of coffee, which I identified in Vancouver. And coffee's always been very important to me. When I reflect back on the '90s, pre-internet, the way we know it now, certainly, you met in the coffee shops. You weren't going to get in touch with anybody. You just had to know where people were, and you went there. It became a very important cultural cornerstone. Maybe Friends is a good indicator of how that was lived out. But that coffee theme played out through my whole life, and I can recall in early 2000s, walking into a coffee shop and just feeling like I just walked into a house I'd never known. And I remember thinking to myself, this is what I want. So this is going back, 15 years. So when I was in Afghanistan after that, I, always with a pen and paper, a little bit of free time, I started sketching out what a coffee shop business would look like to me. I went back to Afghanistan afterwards, and I understood coffee as a tool, right? And certainly in certain cultures, you need to have the coffee or the tea before the conversation. It's proper social convention. And coffee just became thematic in my life. So that business plan I brought forward was the coffee shop. And I decided at that point that that's the path I wanted to take. And I was going to get out of the military, and I was going to open up my own coffee shop. And, with the support of my wife, and certainly with my pension now accessible to me, but also as part of the confluence, right? My kids needed stability in high school. I felt we needed to stay stationary. They needed to be able to not be affected by another military move, et cetera. So it seemed appropriate, and the family agreed that it was time to get out. So perhaps a little unorthodox. Certainly, there were some in the family and friends and professionally that were sort of scratching their head going, what are you doing? You're on the right path. And I thought, I'm not on the wrong path, but this is the path I think I need to be on. Mm-hmm. And the circumstances suggest that I need to think really hard about that. So I owe a great credit to my wife. We talked about it for about 2 years. I mulled over it. I'd done the boot camp, and I built the business plan. I tapped into all the resources available to me. And then, the strong woman she is, she's like, okay, this is the way this is going to work, Brock. You're going to pick a date and get out, or you're going to sum up and carry on. And that's what I did. I picked a date. And, once you make that decision, kind of changes your perspective, changes your lens on the trajectory. And it was a very quick process to move on from the military. It was easy to get out. It was a little harder to transition into the new reality. And I think that's, where I need to express, the importance of all the stuff that happened to me beforehand, right? Because when I got out of the military, I had a plan, but I didn't know how to execute it, other than with the military mindset, right? That's the mission, I shall charge forward. But that was causing me some anxiety. I wasn't achieving ends fast enough. I was getting a little frustrated. The way I sort of reflect on it now is I replaced a linear path with a linear path, right? I needed to get this job done. And that was starting to cause me a few issues. Just personally, I need to be able to achieve this, or I don't want to be perceived as a failure or whatnot, and that, there's a whole concept of failure there. Failure is not a bad thing, right? But two things happened. This is really exciting for me because, on that pursuit towards opening up a coffee shop, I started spending more time in the coffee shops. I wanted to watch the interaction with the clients. I wanted to understand the demographic. I had some questions I wanted answered, right? How does Wi-Fi get managed? How do you keep customers moving in and not just locking into a desk and drawing on Wi-Fi for 2 hours with the coffee firm? These were important questions to me in the business plan. And I walked in one day and there was a gap. Somebody, a friend of mine now, needed a new host for his open mic. Well, I can do that. I'll do that. So 2 years later, I'm still hosting open mics. And what a great access point to the community. People got to know me. I was able to provide a stage for others. I felt like I was a part of the community, and I felt like I was giving something to the community. And communities form around these coffee shops still. It's part of what makes coffee shops so endearing. But a second thing happened as well too. This is one that sort of really knocked me off my trajectory, that military mindset towards the coffee shop. Was my daughter was in a skiing program to learn alpine skiing, and I decided, I'm gonna take a course too. I'm up there, I might as well use the time. So I took a course, and that led to a job. So now I find myself as an alpine ski instructor. I'm running open mics, I'm teaching skiing, I'm loving being outside. I got time with my kids. And I had to do a really hard look at my coffee path trajectory, right? The military mind was like, Brock, get back on track. But the passionate mind is saying, hey, slow down a little bit here. You don't have to get there. You got something that you're enjoying doing right now, right? So in the end, I deviated from the path a little bit. And I followed my passion, right? So, and that's led to a myriad of opportunities now. I play in a band, Class of 91. Our album comes out in 2 weeks. I'm hosting shows still. COVID was an interesting problem set, but we've gotten through it, and we're introducing live music back into the world. People need that. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants that right now. To be able to offer that is just the catharsis is incredible. And it got me thinking at that point. I thought, okay, listen, the coffee shop's there, but I'm really enjoying this. So what am I going to do about the coffee shop? And I thought, well, you know what? Let me test my passion for the coffee shop. And I decided to take a job as a barista and just work within the industry, watch it unfold from the inside, maybe answer those questions through employment, and just make sure I actually really enjoyed doing it, because I was about to commit to myself to it fully. And now I'm 2 years as a barista, and I'm loving it. And I've got a new relationship with my goal now, right? I still aspire to a coffee shop, but I no longer hold it as the objective, to use military parlance. I hold it as a beacon. I know it's out there. I haven't lost sight of it, but I'm just not so stressed about getting to it in a military-minded way. I'm just going to leave it be where it is. I'm going to get to know my community. I'll keep building up on the business plan. And if it comes to be, it shall come to be. But I'm having too much fun with my kids, meeting people like yourself, Daryl, and just engaging with my community. Yeah. And being creative. It's a phenomenal place to be. Now I rock climb weekly. As I suggested, my band has an album coming out. I play guitar every week. I can't go anywhere in my little community without bumping into somebody who I know. And it's just a wonderful place to be. Some might suggest I'm distracted. I've heard that, Brock, you're all over the place. Yeah, okay. But I know where I'm going, right? When you navigate, you got to move around trees and rocks every now and again. And like I suggested before, I needed to get out of my own way. And that was a mind shift, a change in attitude. So there's a quote that I latch onto right now, and every military member has one quote. I've already sort of referenced Lewis Carroll, but that wasn't a full quote. This one is from, I believe she's an author, Annie Dillard, and it's, how you spend your days is, of course, how you spend your life. It's an important quote to me because what it suggests is what you do daily is really a reflection of your life. And, I understand now that life is a journey, and I understand that the journey is the destination. It's a meme, it's cliche, I get it, but it's so very true. And if you do any research or reading in that stream, you start to understand concepts like the hedonic treadmill, right? If you achieve an end, you're going to have to replace it with a new objective. So, the quicker we get to our goals, and sometimes we need to get to them quickly, you need to be ready to move on again. And I'm enjoying the journey on this path right now too much to force that hedonic treadmill to move any faster. I suggested earlier as well that I wasn't a great student, but I'm a wonderful student now. I love the intrinsic value of learning. I read and I read and I read and I write and I engage people. And there's a love of learning now that didn't exist. And as I suggested before, I get to be a part of the community and share and learn from them. But I do want to suggest one thing, coming out of the military, moving into this phase of my life, chapter 3, as I refer to it, there is a gap, right? Service as a career, service as a lifestyle is an important feature. I mean, that was a big part of who I was. And there was a gap, and I fill that gap now through, I'll use the word philanthropy. I don't know if that's appropriate, but it's by giving back and raising money. So one of the reasons I'm speaking with you as well, and I like what you're doing, is it's an opportunity to offer my fundraising efforts right now, right? So the big one I'm engaged with right now, and why you've got me in a tie today, which doesn't happen very often, is I ride annually for the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride, which is a charity partner with Movember, raising funds and awareness of prostate cancer research and men's mental health, which I feel very important. So, I've got 2 more weeks of that ride going on right now, and then I'll do my ride. And I've set a pretty aggressive goal this year of $10,000, and we're nearing that. The community has been wonderfully supportive. My employers have been wonderfully supportive. So that reciprocal relationship and that respect and that support and that community, it feels warm right now. It's wonderful. But I also play musically for another group called Concerts for Kids, which was started by a friend, and it's a grouping of musicians that a pool, if you will, that can be drawn from to play at fundraising events oriented on CHEO, so the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, and sick kids. And I love just being a part and participating in this stuff, and it's a way of giving back, but it's also selfishly a way of filling the gap I have from no longer serving. So, it fills in all the gaps of purpose and meaning that a life needs, right? So, a lot of people come to me and want to hear my story or bits of it because of the leap I took from the security of a government job. So, yeah, I'll acknowledge there's some risk, maybe some unorthodoxy to that leap, but I did have a net, right? I did have access to a pension and all the benefits of having worked for the government. It could have gone sideways. COVID was a true litmus test, right? It could have gone sideways, but the math was right, and I got through it. So in this instance, my choice had consequences that weren't bad, but it could have been otherwise, right? And I had to be prepared to deal with that circumstance. there's no right or wrong, right? There's no rules. So you have to do what you love doing, and that's what I'm trying to do. And I think you've come to me and asked me to share my story because my understanding is my love of what I do in my community it emanates, I suppose, or it's obvious. So I'll offer one more thing, which is the analysis I did to get out of the military also required the need to look at what I like to do and what I want to like to do, and that's an important distinction because you start to understand that using the coffee shop as a reference again, I love to barista, but maybe I only want to love to be a business owner, and I need to work through that now. And that's kind of where I am right now in the stage of my story. So I'm busy now, probably busier than I ever have been. It is entirely a labor of love. I've come to recognize that time is my greatest commodity. And I would suggest that if you're getting my time, as you are now, it's a direct reflection of how you stand in my priorities. This is valuable to me. This opportunity is valuable to me because my time is not given lightly, but I enjoy giving it when I do. My priorities now are health, body, mind, and spirit, gratitude. I do run a blog, and the intent of that blog originally was tied to business as a launch platform for the business. But what I find I get most out of it now is first and foremost the catharsis of writing, that creative outlet. But because it's oriented on positivity, and I force myself to write weekly, when you think positively, it's really hard to find a negative sort of undertone to that. So, I encourage anybody who's watching this to take a look at the blog. There's 2 years plus of writing in there, and it's a bit of a journey. It's a lot of my musings, but it's an exploration and an examination of a life that at least you've taken an interest in, which I appreciate. And that's really it, Daryl. That's where I'm at now, living life as passionately as I can, and as you suggest in your promo intro, giving back, and I hope I am. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Brock. And I think in the last 25, 30 minutes, everyone who watches this will see what I've experienced getting to know you over the last couple months or so. It's just an incredible story. You're an incredible person. The fact that you want to give back with your free time, everything, it culminates into just such an amazing, inspiring story. So I appreciate you sharing with us today. And as Brock mentioned, he is fundraising for various different charities. And so what I will do, Brock, is I will put your link, um, your website, your Instagram page, everything where our viewers can find you. And if you are in a position where you can donate and help Brock with some of his charitable causes as KIP followers, we'd love to see that happen. If you want to send it to KIP on behalf of Brock, we'll make sure that we get it to him. So please, at the end of the video, please stay tuned. You'll see the links where you could get a hold of Brock and contribute to his causes. Brock, I don't know what to say other than thank you. I appreciate this. I got to learn more about you as a result of this power session, and I truly believe that you've inspired some of our followers. Any closing remarks? I know I'll let you go, but any closing remarks?
Just gratitude. Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you. Thank you very much, KIP followers. Thank you very much, Rise Academy, for sponsoring today's power session. Again, stay tuned for the links to reach Brock. Any donations can be sent directly to him, or you can send them through KIP Foundation, and we'll make sure that we get them to Brock. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.